What's up, Pathfinder players? Welcome back to the channel. TPG here, and today I've got another teamwork strategy video for you. I call this one the Unfair Cagematch. Let's get into it. This strategy works best against opponents that have low fortitude DCs. For this strategy, you will need a melee attacker that is good at grappling, preferably a barbarian with a furious grab feat. But you could also do this with a fighter or a monk. The second thing you will need for this strategy is the Wall of Stone or Force Cage spell. Which spell you use will depend on the situation, your level, and how much danger you want to put your grappler in. The last thing you will need for this strategy is the Black Tentacles spell. If you're using the Wall of Stone spell for this strategy, you may also want all of your party members to be able to fly, with the exception of your grappler, whether that's through ancestry feats, the fly spell, or an item. For this strategy, the grappler does not need to be able to fly. If you plan on attacking the target or targets of this strategy, Wall of Stone is the better choice. If you plan on making this a one-on-one cage match, Force Cage is the better option, assuming that your grappler is willing to take on a little danger. So how does this strategy work? Well, for this strategy, whoever is casting the Wall of Stone or Force Cage needs to go first. If they are using Force Cage for this strategy, they just have to cast it. They also need to make sure that the grappler and the enemy or enemies targeted are within the spell's area. For this, the grappler wants to be in the cage. So if I were GM, I would allow him to not make the save. The enemies do get a reflex save to get out of the cage though. It's a little more complicated if you're casting Wall of Stone, however. First of all, no reflex save because it's Wall of Stone, not Force Cage. Secondly, the caster needs to make the Wall of Stone as follows: 30 feet long on two sides, and 25 feet long on the other two sides. This will give the grappler in this situation a little bit of breathing room, but that configuration will also mean that the target or targets cannot run forever. They will run into the Wall of Stone eventually, and just like with Force Cage, we want our barbarian and our enemies within the area. We also want to cast it so that our barbarian is near one of the walls. For this strategy, it doesn't matter if the enemies are near walls or not. Our second caster would then cast Black Tentacles. Where he wants to cast it is ultimately dependent on what cage we're using. If we are using Force Cage for this strategy, then he wants to cast it right where the Force Cage is. If we're using Wall of Stone, he wants to cast it right next to one of the walls. It really doesn't matter which wall as long as it's not hitting the grappler. If we're using Wall of Stone, we want to get as many enemies as we can in this area. If we're using Force Cage, it's probably better to have a one-on-one fight. Now all the barbarian has to do in both cases is use Furious Grab to grab a target and hold him over the Black Tentacles. Then in the case of multiple enemies, he just has to attack until that target goes down and then move on to the next one. In the case of Force Cage, then the barbarian just has to wait until the caster that casts Force Cage stops concentrating on it. Then move out of the Black Tentacles. I'm already hearing two questions from you guys. Number one, wouldn't the strategy put the barbarian right in the middle of the Black Tentacles? Not necessarily. If you put it in the correct spots, then the barbarian could have some breathing room. Some of the Black Tentacles can be outside the wall. In fact, that's ideal, because in that case, if the enemies get through the wall, they still have to deal with some Black Tentacles, possibly. But the grappler may have to go through some of the Black Tentacles to get to enemies. That's why it's ideal to have a barbarian for this strategy. A barbarian is going to have a high fortitude DC, so it's going to be kind of hard for the Black Tentacles to grab him. And even if they do, he's got the hit points to survive for quite a while in there, even without a high constitution, unlike some other marshals. The other question I'm hearing is, why do we need to be able to fly? Well, quite simply, it's so that if we have multiple enemies in this targeted area, other party members can attack them. If other party members can fly over the wall, they can hit the enemies that the barbarian isn't dealing with ranged attacks. For this strategy though, we only want to put as many enemies in this area as the barbarian can handle. Any enemies that we put in there are going to be able to attack the barbarian, or if they have ranged attacks, might be able to attack other party members. The point is, this strategy puts much of the burden on the grappler, so we want to minimize that as much as possible. The other reason we want to be able to fly in this scenario is so that if the barbarian needs healing, someone can go in and heal him with battle medicine or a heal spell or something like that. Also, we have a way of getting our grappler out if we can fly. That's very important too, assuming we're using Wall of Stone. With Force Cage, we just have to stop the spell and then the barbarian or whatever grappler can get out on his own. So what happens after we do all this? Well, we've got one or more enemies in this area and a very good grappler, like a barbarian. This grappler has one enemy grappled and hanging over black tentacles. Guess where he's going if he escapes? That's right, straight into the black tentacles. And because of the cage, they are stuck in this area with the black tentacles and a martial attacker that wants to attack them. Plus, the grappler can throw any enemies that he's not dealing with into the black tentacles. Can the enemies break through the wall? Of course they can. But they're wasting actions to do this. Actions they could be spending trying to attack the barbarian, or trying to attack any of the flying enemies that are trying to attack them. Plus, even if they get through the wall, that square is considered difficult terrain, plus they might have to deal with more black tentacles, giving the barbarian plenty of time to stop them. This strategy is a great way to deal with minions once you've dealt with the boss, or a boss that doesn't have very good fortitude saves or melee attacks. Is this strategy perfect? Of course not. But I think it's pretty good. But obviously this strategy does not work well against flying enemies. Let me know what you think of this strategy down in the comments. And if you don't like it, let me know how you would fix it in the comments as well. And that's going to wrap up this video. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Pathfinder 2nd Edition teamwork content. You can also check out my Facebook and my Twitter. But if you really want to support me, you can pledge to me on Patreon. Links are in the description. So until next time, remember, teamwork is vital.